Hey guys, Eckhart Slaughter here, and welcome to another episode of Star Wars Starship Versus, the series where I take two of your favorite Star Wars spaceships, put them head to head, and try to predict which one would come out on top. Today's video features two pretty heavy transport type ships, with the Republic's LAAT gunship taking on the Rebel Alliance's U-Wing. This was suggested in a previous video by Fives. Now, if you want your recommendation to be made into a video, make sure that you comment right away because the early comments always get the most likes, and I always see the comments that get the most likes. But before we really get into the matchup, I just want to go over the vote results from last video. And it was kind of a funny one because we put R2-D2 against Wally. And there were actually two rounds, one where it was just the two droids going head to head, and the second one where they were bloodlusted. I predicted that R2-D2 would win the first one, although just slightly, and that Wally would win the second. As usual, you guys agreed with me. 87% of you thought that R2-D2 would win round 1, and that's actually a bit more than I expected. While round 2 was a little bit closer, with only 62% of you thinking that Wally would win. Thank you to everyone who voted last time, and make sure you take a second to do so again today. Alright, so back to today's matchup, and again, we're looking at the low-altitude assault transport ship, often called the LAAT gunship for the Republic, against the Rebel Alliance's U-Wing. Now, there were several variants of the LAAT gunship, but I prefer the in-atmosphere model, so this battle is actually going to be the first one that takes place in air instead of in space. So as usual, this is a one-on-one matchup, no ship gets backup, and they only carry on them what they typically would have had on board. So the U-Wing will have a pilot and a door gunner, while I'll give the LAAT gunship a pilot, a co-pilot, and then two gunners. Also, we're assuming that the pilots of each of these vehicles are equally talented, and because the U-Wing doesn't exist in Legends, we'll be looking at the canon version of the LAAT gunship. Alright, so for this matchup, we'll be looking at three categories: weaponry, defensive capabilities, and then intangibles. But I'll be evaluating this matchup overall, so just because one ship wins two categories doesn't necessarily mean that it comes out on top. Alright, so let's start with armament and weaponry, and we'll take the U-Wing first. And as more of a dropship, the U-Wing was pretty lightly armed. It had two forward-facing laser cannons, and then an ion cannon which could be opened up and fired from the door, only if in atmosphere. The LAAT gunship, on the other hand, was exceptionally well armed for the role it filled. It had two manned composite beam laser turrets on each side of the vehicle. On top of that, each wing also had automated beam turrets, which had a really good range of motion and were meant to fight against airborne units. It also had laser cannons on the front and the back, and air-to-air and air-to-ground missile launchers. All in all, the ship is exceptionally well armed, and more than just that, it's very versatile, and due to the placement of the turrets, it can cover a very wide area. So I'll give this category to the LAAT gunship because, again, as I said, the U-Wing was not very impressive when it comes to weaponry. Alright, so let's now look at shielding, and I think we should remember that both of these ships are meant for troop transport, not direct combat. Still, when I look at the LAAT gunship, I am kind of surprised that it isn't shielded, especially because, as we see during the Clone Wars, the ship would often participate in battles, especially in an anti-infantry role. Still, if you actually watch the end of the Battle of Geonosis, when the main characters are chasing Count Dooku, the ship actually does take at least a dozen shots from the two following Geonosian starfighters, and it only really blows up after Anakin and Obi-Wan step off. The U-Wing, on the other hand, actually is shielded, but it's hard to say how well. I mean, pretty early on in Rogue One, we see, unsurprisingly, that a U-Wing goes down after it hits a rock pillar. Then later, during the Battle of Scarif, one is taken down by seemingly just a couple of shots from a TIE striker. All in all, if I were to guess, I would say that the hull of the LAAT gunship is probably a lot sturdier than that of the U-Wing, but the Rebel ship does actually have a dedicated shield. And really, that is unsurprising because the U-Wing was meant to travel through space, and I think its design contemplated space combat more than the LAAT gunship. So I'll give this category to the Rebel Alliance's U-Wing. Alright, so now we have intangibles, and there are only a few things that I would like to mention here. The first is that, and this one is pretty major, that the U-Wing is about 1.5 times as fast as the LAAT gunship. It is probably a little bit more maneuverable as well, although both ships are fairly bulky. Second, the U-Wing has two different wing configurations. The first is where the wings are up against the side, pointing forward, and that's the one that's typically used in atmosphere. However, there is also the flight configuration where the wings are back, and that's useful during combat because it helps keep the ship cool and functional and also increases the range of the deflector shield. However, the flight configuration does not work well in atmosphere. Also, both ships are pretty large targets. The U-wing is quite a bit longer than the LAAT gunship, though the LAAT gunship is taller. With all that in mind, let's look to the actual battle, and this one is interesting because it's kind of like two helicopters going head to head, one that's slightly faster but less well armed in the U-wing versus the slower, kind of bulkier but armed to the teeth LAAT gunship. Now, one thing people usually bring up when they talk about the U-wing is when it took down that AT-ACT, which is the kind of modified looking AT-AT during the Battle of Scarif. However, I will say, Rogue One shows that these walkers are much more vulnerable than the traditional AT-ATs. I mean, we see that an X-Wing is able to blow it up with basically one volley of shots. Also, when the U-wing takes the walker down, it does so by attacking its knees. And according to the Rogue One visual guide, these were extra vulnerable due to the presence of an electromagnetic tensor field. And once that's disabled, the knees and the legs and the whole walker basically collapses. So really, I'm not impressed by the U-wing's weapons. On the other hand, as I've mentioned, the LAAT gunship is very heavily armed. And more than just that, it's got weapons pointed in every direction. Although I will say, during Attack of the Clones, a clone trooper makes a remark which kind of suggests that the laser weapons may not be really very effective against airborne vehicles. However, the LAAT should have a full salvo of rockets, including specialized air-to-air rockets, which I think will make quick work of the U-wing. I don't think either of these ships are really very well protected. I mean, as I said, the LAAT has no shields, but does seem to be relatively sturdy, while the U-wing has shields, but is seen being taken out by a TIE Striker. All that being said, I do think it will take longer for the U-wing to destroy the LAAT gunship, just because its weapons, again, are really disappointing. All it has are the two very standard forward-facing laser cannons, which the LAAT gunship has shown to be resistant to, and then the side cannon. On the other hand, all the LAAT really needs to do is get a lucky shot off against the ship, which, based on all its weapons, I think will be very possible. Really, I think the only chance that the U-wing has is to try to use its speed to circle the gunship while strafing it with its weapons. But I do think the laser bulbs and other weapons on the gunship will help kind of neutralize that speed advantage for the Republic. All in all, pretty much solely because of how powerful its weapons are, I'm going to give this battle to the LAAT gunship. I think it will be able to hit the U-wing, and one or two shots should take it down. The U-wing, on the other hand, will have to get quite a few shots in on the gunship to really knock it out of the sky. So yes, I'll give it to the Republic, and I say it wins 7 times out of 10. Perhaps the U-wing would be able to effectively use its speed to avoid the weapons of the gunship while chipping away at it with its ion cannon on the side or its laser cannon on the front. But again, more times than not, I give this to the low altitude assault transport ship. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching. Take a second right now to vote on who you think would win, and of course, let me know down in the comments what you thought, if I missed something, if I nailed it and got it right, and of course, which matchup you'd like to see next time. And if you see a matchup that you like, make sure to give it a thumbs up and leave a supporting comment, because that is how I choose the topics for my upcoming videos. Anyways guys, once again, thank you so much for watching, and as always, may the Force be with you.